Welcome to SQL for Absolute Beginners, Lesson 6. In this lesson, we are going to look at the data types. Now, in each of these tables that we are going to define, we will have obviously different columns or different fields. And each of these fields, each of these columns will be holding some kind of specific type of data. That is, it could be names, it could be numbers, it could be date, phone number, social security number. So each of these types of data will require certain type of operation to be performed with the data. So for example, if you have let's say date, you might put date between certain time range. If you have numbers, you might be required to add or subtract or do some kind of mathematical operations. If it is names, you would like to sort the number, the names. If you have phone numbers, well, it looks like numbers, but they don't need to be added or subtracted because they are very specific type of text information. So all of these are specific types of data, and before we actually start putting data into the table, we need to create a table, obviously, that we are going to do. But even before we create a table, we need to know what are the columns going to be in that table. In that, those are the fields, and for each of those fields we need to know the types of it. So in MySQL, there are very specific types of columns that are defined, meaning the types are defined and we have to select out of those. Now there are pretty standard ones, so it is not very specific to just MySQL. Even Oracle would have the same thing, or SQL Server would have the same thing, but in general these are the types of data. So the very first one we'll start with is called string type. String type is nothing but text type also. So text meaning it would contain certain characters, such as, let's say, name would contain characters. Now in string type or text type data, there are two different ways it can be defined in MySQL especially, but I think most of the database systems allow this. One is called CHAR, or char, stands for character basically. So, and then in parentheses you define how many characters. So let's say the names you are expecting could be 30 characters long or 10 characters long. If you include first name, space, last name, things like that, that might become little longer. If you have two separate fields defined, first name only and last name only, maybe you may need 10 or 15 characters, things like that. Anything above would be truncated, meaning it won't be part of the data that will be stored. Now that is called char, and then you define the size of that character type of text. The difference, or rather the characteristic of this type, is that it's called a fixed length data type. Fixed length meaning whatever size you define, this database will provide a space for that much length. Whether you use it or not, that is not required, that is not important from the computer's perspective. So it will define and it will allocate that much fixed length for all of the records as soon as you start inserting or adding those records. Now on the other side, well, before we go there, the fixed length character size can contain letters, numbers, special characters, any type of text that is that you can store there. So it is not restricting anything on that side. And the length can be the size, that is of the character would be from 0 to 255, and of course the default is at least one character should be there. So you can have max of 255. Now the other type, which is still a text type or string type, but a little different way you can define it, is called varchar, we call it, which is a variable character length. So why it is variable? Variable means some names could be longer, some names could be shorter. So when we define in a char type, it will always provide a fixed length space no matter whether you use it or not. Now what's the implication then? Well, the implication is, if you define, let's say, 15 character length field, and if you are not using all the 15 and you just insert or enter only the 5 character long name, computer will still allocate 15 or 10 character, whatever size you provided into that allocation space. That means the computer will always use that much space. Now if you go and consider that I have a 1 million row long table, and if we allocate 10 character length, while we are actually using only 5 to 7 characters, that means we are providing extra space, and that much extra space is unnecessarily actually used. It is still used, even though it is not used by you, but computer has used it. You see the difference? So basically that blank space is still a space, and that is going to be used, while in the other case varchar, it won't use that much space. So depending on how many characters length the name is entered, it will automatically allocate only that much space. So varchar definitely is a much better way to do it. It's a variable length string, and char length is still useful, but in general you would see most of them could be used as varchar. Now where do you use this? Well, think about a phone number. A phone number is a character type. It's a string type data that would obviously will have a fixed length. At least in the US, that's how it is. Like your character length is 3, 3, and 4. That is the standard location for the phone number. Now, if you add a dashes between these first 3 and the second 3 number, then you may need 12 spaces. So all the 12 spaces will always be used, or if you go by 10, all the 10 space will be used when you enter the phone number. So that is not we are going to waste the size, and you can still use by character size, character as a type. While if you have a name as a field, then it is suggested that you use varchar as a type. So this is just a string type. Now the another and most commonly used another type is numeric type. Numeric type is nothing but either it could be an integer number. Integer means without decimal numbers, full exact number, which is 1, 2, 5, 10, like that. And the other type of number could be float. It is called the type, and float is nothing but with decimal values. So 1.2, 1.25, all those type of numbers called float. Now there are a few other types also for additional flexibility and all. We are not going to go too much into detail, but integer and float are very basic types, and that should suffice for our purpose. Now obviously there is an allowed range from how many numbers you can add, but there are billions of values range you can use it for. So at this point we don't need to go too much into detail. Another common type and will be required to be defined is date and time. So date type of data is having normal format. Well, would be YYYY, like 4 numbers for the year, then dash MM, which is for month, and then dash DD, which is for date. Now this will go from year 1000 to year 9999. So I think it should cover our pretty much lifetime. So that is one type. Now this is just the date. It does not include any timestamp or time section. Now there is another type where if you do need actual time also to be captured and stored as a data, then you should use the field type as date time. It's called one word, date time, and it will include not only year, month, date, but also include hour, minute, and seconds. So when the data was uploaded and all that, if you need to capture exact time of transaction, things like that. Let's say in the bank, you want to make sure when the deposit was received, when the withdrawal happened. So there it will, this kind of value, this type of field will be helpful. Additionally, you can also have timestamp, time, year of the actual year. These are all related types, but date and date time would be very commonly used, and we'll see that. Now the last thing I would say is there is a very specific type called null. Now null is a little bit strange, because in general, when in general English, if you have to say there is null, meaning it is nothing there. Well, the nothing means really nothing in computers understanding, means it is not even zero there. If it is basically completely blank, it cannot be defined what is there, that's when it will come as null. In MySQL, all of the data types has to be defined as, will you allow null here in this particular field or not? Why it is necessary? If you remember a very early stage when we are introducing the database, that time we define that certain records may be blank, may be allowed, may not have data, like name is there but there is no phone number, things like that. In those cases, we have, if we defined at allow null, then it will let that field be left blank. But if you say don't allow, then if when you are entering data, it will complain, meaning it will say, hey, I need data in this particular field because it is not allowing null. It has to have something there. So we'll see when actually we enter data, but this is very good and key concept to be considered. Okay, now if you, this is just a high level data types we went through. There are many other data types. In general, these are the most common ones, but very specific ones are there. Or if you want to learn a little more about this, always go to MySQL and look for data type for the reference section. If you are on MySQL actually main website, there is a section called documentation, and there you will find all these references including data types. So you will find much more information about that. So I don't want to go too much into detail because we are more interested in actually going for hands-on exercise, and that's what we will start in the very next section, which will be creating our schema. So think about our tables. Where do we reside? Remember, we need to have a bundle, so we have to go little bit reverse way. We need to define a box, a basket, you can call that as a database or a schema, in which we are going to put our books, which are going to be our table. So first we need a basket. That's where we'll start putting all this stuff. So we need to create that basket, which is creating database, and then we will start creating tables. That is what we'll put into that basket. So in the next lesson, we'll be really going hands-on, and I appreciate your patience, but I hope all these fundamentals are helping you, and in the next lesson we'll dive into creating database. Until then, enjoy. Thank you.